Hi there, my friends. My name is Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of books like Jazz Piano Fundamentals, Book 1, Book 2, and Playing Solo Jazz Piano. This is a good time to remind people, if you're not aware, there are translations, 2 different translations of Playing Solo Jazz Piano. Tocando Solo Jazz Piano for you Spanish speakers, and Suonare il Piano Jazz Solo for Italian speakers. Don't sell a lot of those, so buy them. Whether you speak the language or not, just buy. Anyway, today I want to talk about octatonic voicings. Probably a lot of you are familiar with the octatonic scale. We'll do some basic review, but then I want to tell you about what the implications are for octatonic voicings, for forming really interesting voicings and using them for a lot of planing. If you watch my last video, we'll kind of talk about the overlap between those 2 things. So, fun topic, really rich, interesting voicings. Let's dive in. There's no time to waste. No time to waste, people. Okay, I'm going to do a fast recap on the octatonic scale. Maybe I should say octatonic scales. I do have a more in-depth video about them. I'll try to link it somewhere here. Okay, octatonic means 8 notes. Sometimes these scales are called the diminished scale. You'll see why I have S in parentheses. You might hear some people refer to them as a diminished scale. These octatonic scales alternate between a whole step and a half step. And the reason that we have 2 of them is that we could start either with a whole step or with a half step. And because we're not very creative, we generally call them either whole half or half whole. The whole half starts with a whole step. So whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. I'm reaching the edge of my paper. Oh, this is great. Good production value. Thanks, iPad. Half step, whole step, half step. The whole half version goes with a C diminished 7th. Or it just goes with a diminished 7th based on the first note. And you can see that it has all of the notes of a C diminished. And additionally, all the notes leading into that by a half step, right? Because we alternated whole steps and half steps. The half whole step scale is maybe more interesting to us as jazz musicians, jazz lovers, jazz improvisers. So we start with a half step, whole step. By the way, since there's 8 notes, there's not like a standardized 1 pitch per note. You know, if you do a major scale, a 7-note scale, we always try to have 1 C, 1 D, 1 E, 1 F, etc. Not really the case for these 8-note scales. You can be a little bit creative, maybe not too creative, but you don't have to be totally obsessed with having the exact right accidentals. There's not like a correct place to put the doubling. I just try to avoid any like crazy double flats or double sharps or like B sharps, E sharps, F flats, you know, that kind of thing. The half whole scale is sometimes called the diminished dominant scale. And that's because it goes with dominant chords with altered 9s. So C7 flat 9, C7 sharp 9, or, you know, even C7 flat 9 and sharp 9. And so you can see in this scale, we have the root, the flat 9, the sharp 9. And those are the 2 notes that really give it its unique sound. The 3rd, the sharp 11th, or flat 5, the 5, 13, and then the dominant 7th. So, you know, this sounds really nice against a dominant chord. Now, what's important for these purposes to realize about these scales is that they are symmetrical scales. Okay, and this is absolutely key to everything that we are going to be doing in the next 10 minutes or so. And by symmetrical scales, we mean that we have a repeated interval pattern, so that if we started them different places, we would actually get the same scale, right? Think about it. If we're alternating half step, whole step, half step, whole step, if we start kind of in the same place in the alternation, right? If we start at E flat, we're still alternating half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So the E flat octatonic scale is going to have the same pitches as the C octatonic scale. And every minor third we go up, right? Every 2 notes in the scale gives us a minor third. If we start at F sharp, we're going half step, whole step, half step, whole step. If we start at A, we're going half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So that means we can always transpose anything by minor thirds because the interval pattern is going to start again. And if we transpose something by minor thirds, it will stay within that same scale. And that is true for either whole half or half whole because they are both symmetrical in this way. So let me say that one more time because this is the key learning. I'm going to make myself big so you can tell that I'm serious. That's my teacher face. Okay, so when you're using an octatonic scale, if you have a lick, if you have a chord voicing that uses the notes of that octatonic scale, that stays within the octatonic scale, if you transpose it by minor thirds, those notes will continue to belong to that octatonic scale. You don't have to think about it. As long as the intervals stay the same, it will stay in that octatonic scale. So here's one example, which is kind of cool, actually, I think. Looking at this diminished dominant, the half whole octatonic scale here. Let me make this bigger for y'all. We can actually find the notes of a C major triad. I'll highlight them for you: C, E, and G. And so if we have a C major triad, guess what we're also going to have? All of the triads moving up by minor thirds. So we're also going to have an E flat triad, major triad, a G flat major triad, and an A major triad, because we're just taking that exact shape and we're moving it up by minor thirds. Right? I think in my other octatonic video, I gave the John Williams example. And you can see Debussy and Ravel and some of these composers using this principle with triads quite a lot. Let's take it one step further. We could also have the seventh, the dominant seventh of these chords. And we're using all notes within the octatonic scale. And so C7, assuming that C7 is part of the scale, which it is, that means we know we're going to have E flat 7, G flat 7, or F sharp 7, I don't care how you name it, and A7 also within the scale. Pretty nifty. Okay, so that's just kind of basically how this is going to work. We're going to keep transposing things up by minor third. One thought for y'all, transposing by minor third, at least for me, is not the easiest thing to transpose by, right? Like minor third, major third, which one is it? And so one of the things that I try to do is I'll think, these 4 notes, C, E flat, G flat, and A, make up a C diminished chord, right? C, E flat, G flat, and A. So instead of necessarily thinking, okay, minor third, that's 3 half step, or whatever, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to start it on each of the notes of a C diminished chord. So if that helps you, great. But this might just be kind of one of the things that you need to practice and get used to, because it is, in my opinion, one of the more difficult transpositions. All right, so now I want to show you some voicings that sound cool, because these triads and 7th chords are nice, but they're not necessarily the most interesting voicing. So first we're going to start with a closed position voicing, right? Closed position means within an octave, and I'm going to give you my favorite one here. Okay, so I love the little crunch between the bottom 2 notes, also between the D flat and the C there. Great. So now we can transpose this up or down, for whatever it's worth, by minor third. So this would be like a C7. I'm going into treble clef because I don't want to have a ton of ledger lines. So we know we're going to go to E flat 7, G flat 7, and A 7. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to maintain a half step between the bottom two notes. And then let's see, what's the easiest way to do this? I know I'm going to have this note on top, a third below, and then I'm creating a little minor triad here with the top three notes. Do you see it's an A minor triad? So between E flat and C, I know I can have a C minor triad. G flat, same thing. I'm going to create my crunch with a G natural, and then I'm going to create a minor triad. I think I'm doing this right. A, I'm going to create my crunch, and a triad. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, so all those notes are within the C half whole octatonic scale. Is this working? Yeah, okay. I was looking at my hands, so I didn't know. Here's a little small variation on this. I'll show you one at a time. We can change that middle note if you kind of prefer this color to a G to the fifth of each chord. And it's a little bit, it's less like super crunchy. This has like multiple layers. The last one has multiple layers of crunch. If we use the fifth instead of the 13th, that kind of focuses the crunch to that. It's a little bit of a brighter sound. So here's the previous one, that's not written down anymore. I think that's really nice and sophisticated. Here's this one. Okay. Maybe some of you are wondering, is this planing? Last video, if you're keeping track of the channel, we talked about planing. And yeah, I'd say this is a version of planing. This is a very specific version of planing where we're transposing by minor thirds. But sure, we're doing exactly what planing is, which is taking a single shape and moving it multiple places. So that's like a closed position voicing. Let me show you what's sort of like a drop 2 version of that. This is how I think about it in my mind, at least. Okay, so this is like a C7. You see the 3rd and the 7th, the sharp 9 and the 5th, and it's very nice and rich. Okay. This does not have the root in it, right? And so I'm going to be thinking of going up in minor thirds to different dominant 7th, sharp 9 chords. So I'm always going to be starting on the 3rd here. So I've sketched in the 3rd. Notice this looks like an E flat triad with an E natural in the bass. So I'm going to just be asking myself, what's the triad a half step below that lowest note? And that's going to give me my solutions. And it looks and sounds like this, if that helps. One thing I like doing with this is to separate out the top 2 notes. That's kind of fun. Now we could also try to make some bigger voicings. So those are kind of, in a couple of our voicing traditions. But what if we made a bigger, voicing more based in like fourths? Let's do it like that. That's right. I'm making this up as I go along. I'm no professional. I always laugh when people call me a YouTuber. Seems like if I'm a YouTuber, I should be putting more thought into my videos. Okay. So, kind of a cool voicing here. It's really the same shape in both hands, right? A tritone on bottom, a fourth on top, but they're layered in, guess what? Minor thirds. And so what's actually going to happen, which is kind of cool, and so this would, again, you could use this for a C7. And by the way, anything you can use for a C7, you can also use for an E flat 7 or a G flat 7 or an A7. This is what it means to be symmetrical. What's kind of fun about this, just make sure that's a G flat on top, is that the right hand's going to become the left hand each time. So going up in minor thirds. I don't know if it even makes sense to call this E flat 7 anymore. It's just octatonic. I'm going to go to treble clef here. The right hand's going to become the left hand because that one's a minor third above where we're coming from. And then, yep, D flat. Cool. So you guys can invent your own octatonic voicings. These are a few of my favorites because they have like these really dissonant, interesting intervals in them. But there's plenty of cool shapes within the octatonic scale. That might not be one of them. Up to you. Last thing that I want to make sure to say here, in case some of you are wondering, is that remember, we started with whole, half, octatonic, and half whole. I've only been talking about half whole. But the good news is that each whole half scale is related, has the same set of pitches as one of the half whole scales. Think about it. You're alternating a whole step and a half step. So you're just starting in different places. You'll get to the same pitches. So all these voicings that we've been talking about that work over C, E flat, G flat, A, also C7, E flat 7, G flat 7, A7. They're also going to work over a set of 4 dominant chords, starting a half, all these voicings that we've been talking about that work for C7, E flat 7, G flat 7, A7. Also, we're going to have a set of 4 diminished chords that they work with because the whole half scale is associated with diminished chords. So this is also going to work for D diminished, E diminished, G diminished, and A diminished. So practicing these octatonic scales, it gets you 8 chords that things are going to work with. So, all right, so there's your diminished, D flat diminished. Same thing, C7. The same thing is going to work over both sets. Okay? All right, folks, I think that's it for today. If you enjoyed this and you speak Italian, Suonare il piano jazz solo, available at jeremysiskind.com and on Amazon. If you speak Spanish, Tocando, solo jazz piano. And if you speak only those languages, I'm sorry that you didn't understand anything. But let's all comment Suonare if you made it this far to celebrate the Italian edition. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you soon.